Hello, I'm John Rossi, a touring drummer with a love of all things animal. When I'm on the road, I visit as many zoos, aquariums... Hey, wait a minute. What's going on? Hey, what's going on there? Hello? 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 We interrupt your regularly scheduled program to bring you Rossifari Zoo News. News you can use from the world of zoos and conservation. Every week, we bring you breaking news and analysis from around the globe, featuring the animals you love and the people who care for them. And here's your anchorman, John Rossi.
Hi, hello, how are you? Welcome back to Rossifari Zoo News, your look at everything going on in the world of zoos, aquariums, conservation, and general animal weirdness. And yes, you are not mishearing me. I'm betting that a lot of you were expecting another conference recap this week because I am at, currently still, the joint ABMA IAATE, I almost said that wrong, conference. And it's in Cincinnati, and we're having a great time. And I do actually have a wonderful recap episode for y'all. As a matter of fact, Danny Larson, as well as her coworker Megan, who you've heard on the show before, as well as Zoe and I did the recap episode together, meeting multiple times to talk through the conference. But I know that y'all really love Zoo News, and it's been a while since we've had a Zoo News episode. So I thought that I would cram this into my conference schedule as best I could and get you guys some Zoo News and then drop the recap episode on Tuesday. Now, what that means is that this one is going to possibly be a little short. I don't know. I wrote down the stories, and basically what happened is I was going to do a full episode, and then the conference kept happening and happening and happening. And now it's 11:30 at night, and I am absolutely exhausted. And I only had time to write some stuff. So this is going to feature like one birth and a couple of deaths and like 3 Zoo News stories. It does have a headline story, and it does have a good bit of conservation news. So yeah, it's a normal, albeit maybe a little bit short episode of Zoo News. But yeah, so things have been good here. You're going to hear a lot about the rest of the trip on the recap episode. But so as y'all know, I did the National Zoo in DC and then Greensboro and then went to Midyear. And while we were at Midyear, we also hit up the Georgia Aquarium and Zoo Atlanta. And then after that, we left on our trip to this ABMA IAATE joint conference. And along the way, we visited the Chattanooga Zoo and Zoo Knoxville and the Columbus Zoo and the Louisville Zoo. And then when we got to the conference, we met up with Danny and Megan and went to the Cincinnati Zoo before even starting the conference. Not to mention visiting the Cincinnati Zoo for Zoo Day and also again today during the conference. So to say that this has been an insanely busy couple of weeks is an absolute understatement. Going to be home for a couple of days before heading off on my next adventure to New England, where I've got some really cool interviews scheduled. So I'm excited for that. And that's really everything that's been going on in my life, which is, basically everything. So, yeah, with all of that said, this is Rossifari Zoo News. So if you have any Zoo News stories, you can go ahead and tag me in them on the socials at Rossifari, on TikTok at Rossifari Pod. You can email them to me, rossifaripod@gmail.com. And I will say your name at the end of the episode, whether I use your story or not. So that's a cool thing you can do. You can also hit subscribe, make sure you're following along on all those socials. And don't forget that you can support the podcast for as little as $3 a month by going to patreon.com/Rossifari. Now, with all of that said, let's get to it. So we're going to start off with a headline story, and it's not actually quite the headline story that I planned on doing, because I had planned an entire headline story about Capron Park Zoo in Massachusetts and how we as a community, as a zoo community, as an EAZA community, as the Rossifari community, have to come together to save the zoo. But we don't have to anymore. So That's good. But I still want to talk about the issue and kind of discuss it as a reminder of how much various local, state, and federal governments, or whatever you have in your country, can have a major and sometimes surprising impact on zoos. So, for those of you that don't know, Capron Park Zoo, a small EAZA accredited facility in Massachusetts, got quite the shocking announcement around 2 weeks ago. The zoo was still going to kind of exist, but it was going to stop being a zoo. And yes, I fully realize how confusing that is. Basically, the city, under the direction of Mayor Kathleen DeSimone, released an 11-page document called Reimagining Capron Park Zoo, a transformation plan promoting community, nature, and wildlife rehabilitation in a forward-thinking and financially sustainable manner, which is quite a mouthful for a title. Capron Park Zoo, which is owned and managed by the city, has struggled financially for a very long time, and it seems the mayor decided that enough was enough. So she decided to turn the land into a park focused on education, wildlife habitat, nature trails, rehabilitation, but no actual zoo. No more red pandas, no more lions, no more lemurs, no more SSP breeding and AZA-based conservation efforts. A park, not a zoo. And this is crazy, but apparently this is something that the mayor can just do in Attleboro, Massachusetts. So this was a kind of unilateral decision, and then it went out to the public with lots of fanfare. And fortunately, fans of the zoo were outraged. Public protests, online petitions, PR media campaigns, and social media posts galore erupted, showing displeasure at the decision and threatening to make sure that the mayor would get no support for any other decisions if she went through with the plan. And weirdly enough, the mayor listened and has since rescinded the plan, saying that the zoo will stay open and continue functioning as an AZA-accredited zoo. So that's pretty awesome, and it saves me from having to discuss the full 11-page document that is now headed towards the proverbial shredder. And just to be clear, this isn't a delaying tactic, or at least supposedly isn't. DeSimone has said that the project is dead and no longer under consideration for the future. Instead, the zoo is going to be funded by the city's, quote, free cash through 2027. Free cash is emergency money the government sets aside for one-time unexpected costs. And those costs can include the repair of infrastructure that unexpectedly breaks, or apparently sustaining a zoo for a year. Who knew? And the hope is that by funding the zoo through the 2027 fiscal year, the leadership of the city and the zoo will be able to come together to figure out how to make the facility profitable, or at least sustainable, moving forward. Hopefully, the community will support the zoo with visits, memberships, and donations in the numbers they supported it with protests and petitions. Because honestly, if they do, the zoo should be fine financially. So instead of focusing on the details of the zoo closure and changes being proposed and how we can help and all of that, I'm going to use the space to remind you all that this was a very surprising and drastic example of how governments can step in and change things for zoological facilities, but it's by no means the only way they can, or the only example of it happening that I can think of. Obviously, again, this is truly an extreme example. Animal transfers to the zoo were slated to stop in March, meaning last month, meaning once this decision went public, the first steps were going to start immediately. Often when government interferes with things at zoos, it tends to leave more time for changes to get made, but then still insists that they get made. So, for instance, the Pittsburgh Zoo and Aquarium left the AZA in 2015. It was a decision made because the AZA declared that all elephants had to move to protected contact instead of free contact for the safety of the staff. The Pittsburgh Zoo disagreed strongly and felt that the relationships that elephants and their keepers had built, in some cases over decades, were important to the animals, and that changing those interactions would be stressful for them. So they actually left the AZA rather than put their herd through that perceived stress. And honestly, while y'all know that I love the AZA, I really respected the Pittsburgh Zoo and Aquarium making that decision based on their perceived best welfare of their animals. And they did go ahead and get ZAA accreditation, and they maintained great relationships with the AZA, including staying involved in things like SSPs and abiding by the rules of the AZA in those programs. And even as things progressed, expressing some interest in safe programs and stuff like that. But then early in the 2020s, it came to the attention of the Pittsburgh government that the lease for the zoo specifies that they have to keep AZA accreditation to keep their lease. So the almost 10-year protest of protected contact elephants came to an end. The Pittsburgh Zoo rejoined the AZA, and now the zoo is required to be protected contact with their elephants, which on the surface isn't that big of a deal. I mean, AZA accreditation is the gold standard, and it's very cool that Pittsburgh is a part of it. And it allowed them to be more involved in things like SSPs and safe programs. I mean, the co-leader of both my working group and the vice chair of the entire Safe Red Panda program, as well as our treasurer, all come from the Pittsburgh Zoo and Aquarium. So nice to have them on board. But holy crap, this other side of this is that means that the government got to ultimately make the decision about how the elephants at the zoo are handled. Or they could have taken away the lease and forced the zoo off its property. And that is a crazy thing to think about. And it's not the only example. We've seen this kind of thing in other places as well. France passed a law banning cetaceans in human care, leaving multiple good accredited facilities with a whole host of problems. The biggest, most obvious issues is that the parks that were built around cetaceans would have to pivot to other animals or close entirely. And let's be honest, it's not like you can just throw some red pandas into a dolphin pool. Doesn't work. And don't forget, facilities create 10 or even 20-year-long master plans that they build towards. So this wasn't just messing with the current park situations, but disrupting millions of dollars of research and development and contracting and donation asks and all kinds of things. Then there was another problem. Where should the animals go? Turns out many of the facilities that host these animals already around the world didn't have the capacity to take on all of the cetaceans in France. There are complex social dynamics to consider, as well as concerns about moving the animals and stuff like that. And the facilities themselves also insisted on vetting where their animals might end up. And there was a real concern when some of the facilities that did offer to step up and take the animals were unaccredited and didn't always have the best reputation, and the French facilities were not comfortable moving their animals there. But it was going to be illegal to keep holding the animals. So it's definitely not an ideal situation. And it's kind of crazy that the very people in France who passed this law did so for the supposed health and welfare of the animals. But they created a law that could have led to those animals going to arguably significantly worse facilities, just not in the country. So yeah, something really interesting to think about. And there are even just kind of other small stories that pertain to this. Like I remember when I went to Mill Mountain Zoo a few years ago, they're a ZAA facility, and they are heavily involved in AZA SSPs as well, red pandas, snow leopards, stuff like that. And I asked why they didn't pursue AZA accreditation since they were involved in so many things anyway. And I was told that there were a few reasons. Finances are always a little tricky with AZA accreditation. But that the main one was that the city insisted on keeping their lease year to year. And the AZA has accreditation rules that are built around ensuring the zoo won't suddenly disappear, though the Capron Park situation shows these regulations aren't perfect by any means. But the year-to-year lease automatically makes Mill Mountain unable to be an AZA facility, all because the government won't agree to a longer lease, even though the annual renewal of the lease has been automatic, just rubber stamped every time, no controversy for decades. So yeah, all of this is a really interesting way of looking at how government affairs can really mess with facilities, which is why both the AZA and the ZA pay lots of money to have government affairs committees and lobbyists and advocacy days in Washington, D.C. DC and stuff. It's really interesting to think about, and I really hope that first of all, I really hope that Capron Park Zoo is able to become financially a boon for the city of Attleboro again. It's a great little zoo. I've been there multiple times, and they punch above their weight. And on top of that, I hope this helps kind of everyone listening realize just how much of an impact government can have on zoos. And then that brings us to the rest of our zoo news this week. And I got one whole birth in here before moving on, and then two deaths. Our birth is that our friends at Elmwood Park Zoo have announced the birth of an ocelot kitten. Born to Mom Rio and Dad Mateo, the zoo had actually been hoping to see the pair give birth, but didn't have a lot of hope as they expressed some breeding interest, but not the normal level that leads to, let's say, successful cat pregnancies oftentimes. But apparently the duo did get the job done, and now a little girl has joined the family. And then we get to our deaths for the week, and Khumbie, we start this off with a hard one. I miss my buddy so much. Khumbie, the 11-year-old male red panda at the Philadelphia Zoo, has passed away. During his annual exam, blood work showed some abnormalities, and as the vets looked into what was going on, they found these abnormalities throughout the liver, gallbladder, and abdominal lymph nodes that were consistent with cancer. The team made the very challenging decision to euthanize him. For me personally, Maylin, Khumbie, and Spark were the first red pandas I fell in love with. And Khumbie quickly became my best bud. As my whole life was kind of in a period of transition, I would visit him multiple times a week. And so many good things happened to me while standing at his habitat that I started calling it Red Panda Magic. Seriously. Like, I would get the email I was waiting for, or get an important phone call, book a new gig, you name it, and it happened there. And Khumbie was the first to know. I always told him first. Granted, I spent so much time there that it was probably more just a statistical thing than magic, but it felt pretty magical to me. And, I've moved away from the Philly area, but I always got back to see my boy. And the best part, actually, of playing in Philly this past fall was visiting Khumbie regularly again. And actually finally getting to know his keeper, Abby, and getting to go behind the scenes and meet him and hang out with him and share him with a couple of friends. It was really, really cool. This loss, it hurts a lot. I'm not going to lie, but I'm so grateful for what Khumbie meant to me over the years. Everything I do with Rossifari and Safe Red Panda can be contributed to Khumbie, Maylin, and a few others. And I'm just so grateful for that. Goodbye, my bestest boy. And then the Colchester Zoo has announced the passing of Bailey, the last African lion at the zoo. He was 18 years old and was known for his big personality. One of the coolest things about Bailey was that he would usually start roaring right towards the end of the zoo day, almost seeming to let zoogoers know that, okay, enough, it's time. Go home. And this is just a really tough time for the zoo, who also just said goodbye to the last two sea lions that live there. So sending love to the team as they go through that very challenging time. And then as far as the rest of our zoo news stories for the week, I only got to a couple here. Really exciting, 4 male mountain bongos are being transplanted from the EAZA ex situ program to Kenya, where they will support the recovery of the species in the wild. The animals themselves will remain in human care as they don't have the ability to fully function in the wild, but they will be used for breeding and rewilding efforts in the country. And, this is a great reminder that zoos are constantly out there finding new ways to help endangered wild populations. Something you'll actually get to hear more about in an upcoming episode of the podcast with Dr. Lindsay Van Zant from the Cincinnati Zoo. Some really cool stuff coming in the next couple months from this trip, y'all. I really can't wait to share it. And then the other big story this week, very quickly and simply, April Fool's Day. It happened this week, and zoos came out with an abundance of hilarious April Fool's pranks, from discovering green pandas instead of red to elephants living underwater in Texas and more. Zoos were on fire with their humorous jokes. Even Follow joined in, offering up a limited-time Loch Ness Monster tracking bracelet. Now, sadly, you couldn't actually buy that bracelet because honestly, if they had released one, even with no tracking, just with a cool little Nessie charm, I would have been all in. I like to commit to the bit, even when it's someone else's bit. But yeah, it was a really fun time for April Fools. And I'm very, very proud of the Rossifari audience. I got sent very few stories as actual stories that turned out to be April Fool's jokes. And every single one of you who did send me one of the April Fool's jokes as a real story caught yourselves and sent a retraction. Every single one of you. I am so incredibly proud. I guess that whole media literacy thing we talked about on here might be paying off. So nice job, everybody. And that brings us to
Conservation, news time. Oh yeah.
We're going to start off with some great news for dholes this week, which have been seen in Vietnam for the first time in over 20 years. This represents a significant milestone in the comeback of this incredible species, with organizations like the Dhole Conservation Fund working tirelessly to help their numbers grow. And, you know, it's funny because we were just talking about the political climate and how it can affect zoos. But now we're going to talk about that with a couple of stories in conservation news. So we're going to start with the good news. The Convention for the Conservation of Migratory Species recently held a conference, and a major part of the decision-making there was the creation of some of the world's most threatened shark species getting protections. These protections have been created, have been suggested, have been sent back to the member nations to hopefully adopt. One of those, both. They'll adapt them and adopt them. Anyway, many sharks, including thresher sharks and 2 species of hammerhead sharks, were moved to CMS Appendix 1, which offers them full protections from participating nations. And most countries do, in fact, adapt these protections. So this is a huge deal and a big success, and all of that is wonderful and really good news for those sharks. However, it brings us to our next story, which is that not all government follow rules, and the whims of many leaders determine how protections are actually applied. And we got a great reminder of that this week as the Trump administration has activated the so-called God Squad to waive endangered species protections in the Gulf of Mexico to allow drilling for oil and gas. The God Squad is the nickname of a panel of government officials who get to make decisions about overriding species protections in times of, quote, national emergencies. Now, the emergency in this case is the rise in oil prices thanks to our military actions in Iran, making it a self-inflicted wound, which is really frustrating. And the people on the God Squad are presidential appointees to other positions, like the Secretary of Defense is literally on there. And few, if any of them, have any actual environmental or even scientific training. This is the first time in over 50 years that the God Squad has suspended protections. And in case you're wondering, the name God Squad isn't because of any religious thing, but because these are people who are literally playing God with species survival. And that's just disgusting. So the removal of protections is probably a death sentence to Rice's whales, a species with only 51 individuals left that live in the Gulf, and conservationists have been fighting for them diligently for a long time. The threats to other marine life in the area, including multiple species of sea turtles, are just heartbreaking. And the worst part, it's not just the temporary relaxation or honestly just full ignorance of these limitations, these rules, these protections, but it's the fact that often once a company gets into an area, even if it's in a temporary way, they're not leaving. It's hard to get them out. It can take years and years of legal battles, meaning that even if this is all somehow magically walked back in a year from now, the companies that get in there and start mining for gas and oil, along with the damage they do, it's just going to be really hard to get them out. So this, even if the current, quote, national crisis ends, this is going to be a real problem for whales, sharks, sea turtles, fish, all the things. So that's very sad. I don't want to have A bunch of bad news, though. So we're going to have a couple of good conservation news stories here. So on a much happier note, a mega bloom of rimu berries in New Zealand has triggered a record-breaking season for the critically endangered kakapo. The bloom of berries sparked a mating surge amongst the parrots, allowing almost every female of reproductive age to engage in breeding behaviors because of the abundance of resources. Now, who knows how all that will go and, getting from eggs to hatchlings to adult birds is tricky, but this is huge news for the kakapo population. Very exciting stuff. And speaking of bird populations, the California condor global population has reached over 600 individuals, a milestone that couldn't even be stopped by avian influenza having a rough impact on the population recently. The current wild population is 392 individuals, up from 373 in 2024, and obviously well up from the low of 22 birds back in 1982. With a growing wild population and successful breeding in human care, these birds are poised to keep reaching milestone after milestone. And then last but not least, in conservation news, I'm still amazed at how much of the wild land that is out there hasn't really been explored, or at least not thoroughly. And one such area is a part of the Battambang province in Western Cambodia, where expeditions have recently discovered a new pit viper species and 6 new species of geckos. Between all the discoveries and rediscoveries of species due to new technology that we keep talking about on here, we are getting an incredible picture of the biodiversity of the world and the fact that even with all that we know, this planet is so much more filled with life. Terrible English. Than we even realize. And that just makes me really happy. And that brings us to our animal holidays for the week.
Oh, animal holidays. Animal holidays. Hey!
Happy Passover to those of you who do the Passover thing. We are now in April, which is Ape Awareness Month and National Frog Month. And for your individual days and weeks, we've got April 4th is World Rat Day and World Civet Day. The 5th to the 11th is Canadian Wildlife Week. The 6th to the 10th is National Wildlife Week in the US. I don't know why we get less of a National Wildlife Week than the Canadians do, but whatever. Canadians are better anyway. The 7th is International Beaver Day, so I'll be thinking about my buddy Felix the Beaver. I actually think I'll be up that way on the 7th. Maybe I'll get to say hi to Felix. The 8th is, okay, so this is a good week overall, right? But it's about to go off the rails because the 8th is Draw a Picture of a Bird Day. And the 9th is National Unicorn Day. So, yeah, kind of a sharp drop off at the end there. But those are your animal holidays for the week. All right. Well, there you have it, folks. For all of you Zoo News fanatics out there, you got a week of Zoo News when you didn't expect one, and I hope you all appreciated that. Before I get going, I do want to take a moment to say thank you to all of my patrons, especially my Red Panda level patrons, Dr. Laura Schenk, Dr. Stephen Williamson, Barbara Bennett, Jenny Owens, Melissa Reed, Carrie Kirkpatrick, John Lewis, who is also here for stickers, Kevin Williams, and Cormac McMuffin. Meow. And then, oh my goodness, so many of you have sent stories over the last couple of weeks, so I need to say thank you to Anya Keene, Colleen Linehan, Kim Cooley Croninger, Carrie Kirkpatrick, Kevin Williams, Emily Rockbook, Dr. Natalie Taco, Turhan Hanton, Dr. Laura Schenk, Ren Howell, Jacob Zinn, Holly Page, Nikki Morley, Ethan Ferguson, Dr. Zoe Rossi, Barbara Bennett, Ken Tryon, Marianne Rossi, and Yoshioka.
Ali Malensky, Kay Malensky.
The Malenskys.
April Taylor, Daniel Cohen, Kelly Pulawi, Rowena White, Zach Poe, Crystal Chapman, Jamie Chavez, Kristen Khalil, Maddie Patz, Jennifer Zune, Becca Robinson, Strix. Oh my God, I forgot Strix. Now I remember Strix. Yay, Strix. Michael Sebastian, Melissa Kinney, Rick Schwartz, Sierra Bowen, Sam Evans, Stephen Rossi, Carolyn, who you guys know is Carson the Red Panda, Nicole Lee, and Zach Poe, who I just realized I already said your name, but I'm not editing this. Thanks for sending things in twice, Zach. So we'll be back here on Tuesday for our recap of the joint ABMA IAATE conference. And until then, remember, friends, the words, newsy credits backwards, are Styderk Yuswin.
The Rossifari podcast is produced, hosted, and engineered by John Rossi. Editing and fact-checking by John and Dr. Zoe Rossi. Our theme song is Sevens by Nathan Burke, performed by Nathan and John. Interrupting John theme and additional voices by Taylor Isaac Gray. You can reach John directly on Instagram and Facebook at Rossifari or by email at rossifaripod@gmail.com. Rossifari is part of the Daydreamer Media Network. Now, stop listening to me and go visit a zoo.
And abdominal lymph nodes. Abdominable? What?